Welcome to Beyond the Glory, the podcast that takes you deeper into the untold stories, raw moments, and defining victories that shape the world of sport. I'm your host, John Walland, and each fortnight I bring you candid conversations with athletes, coaches, and trailblazers who go beyond the headlines to reveal the real grind behind the glory. Welcome to Beyond the Glory, the podcast that dives deeper than the stats, beyond the highlights, and into the hearts of heroes who certainly inspire us. I'm your host, John Walland, and today we're joined by none other than a true icon of the game, and that's a World Cup winner, record-breaking try scorer, and one of the most electrifying players to ever wear the green and the gold. Yes, we're talking about the one and only Bryan Habana. Get ready for an unfiltered journey through triumph, resilience, and the mindset of a man who defined a generation of Springbok rugby. This is one for the history books, that's for sure. What a privilege to hear from a living legend, Bryan Habana. Thank you for going beyond the glory with us. Great to be able to chat to you, Bryan. Thank you very much.
John, always great to chat and connect. It's been a while, so great to be on.
It has, and I know that you've been very, very busy, and you know, what I always love about you is that you always come back to me. I know that you're an exceptionally busy man and you out doing stuff for a purpose and also, you know, highly in demand as well. But thank you very much for always getting back. And it's always nice to be able to catch up with you. What have you been up to lately?
John, it's been a pretty busy couple of months. Quite a fair few number of international flights. I was over in Cardiff just a while ago doing the Investec Champions Cup final, where with DHL we got to deliver the trophy to the Principality Stadium. Got to visit some clients. I was in London for a Sage Accountex event, the Alfred Daniel Paddle Classic. About to jump on a flight again tomorrow to go to Lisbon for Laureus at the Icon event before going to the city of Armagh. And then the Laureus event at the Oval, followed by the opening day or day one of the World Test Champion at Lords, and then followed by playing at Old Trafford for the World 15 in the Soccer 8 game on the 15th of June. So it's a busy time. That's while all trying to tell my fellow co-founders and directors that pay me now is my full-time job.
You're amazing. You say a Soccer 8 game. I didn't realize you played a little bit of soccer.
Well, named after Brian Robson and Gary Bailey, I sort of grew up wanting
Yes.
to be the next South African export into the English Premiership. Rugby, thankfully, took me on a very different course. But Shane Morgan, who works for Soccer 8 Production, a former Irish winger, phoned me about 2.5 months ago saying, listen, what would the chances be of me being a part of the World 15 side in June 2025 for the 15th anniversary of the Soccer 8 charity game for UNICEF? And I was like, keep the creepers at Old Trafford. It would be a very difficult opportunity to say no to. So really looking forward to that. The likes of Wayne Rooney, Gary Neville, Edwin van der Sar, I think Tyson Fury and Robbie Williams are the coaches of the England 15 side, with a host of former soccer players and celebrities taking part. So I might have to brush up not on my soccer skills, but a bit on my fitness, given how bad I've been in the last 8 years since retiring, John.
Well, I'll tell you what, as a winger, they don't produce people like yourself so quick and fast, but I would imagine that from a soccer point of view, they put you, what position you're going to be playing there? Always that's a silly question.
Well, I mean, I was going to go with goalkeeper, but the fact that Edwin van der Sar
Right.
is unfortunately in our team has meant that I might have to find myself elsewhere on the field. But yeah, I don't know yet. I think when we get together, I think there is an expectation that I'm still fast, which I'm probably going to have to bring to the fore really quickly, that I'm not, given how dodgy my knees are. So will be interesting to see where they want to put me.
One's got to be very careful. I mean, when I look back and I think of that devastating incident, remember with Wade van Niekerk at Newlands when he came on and played in a touch rugby
Play some
game.
touch rugby.
Yeah, I mean, this was absolutely tragic as far as I was concerned. I mean, I don't even know how he actually was permitted to do something like that, to go and play touch rugby, and kind of was on a long road to recovery after breaking the world record at the Olympics. I mean, came as a big, big shock. And I would imagine that, and I kind of see it almost as if, you know, I mean, you're such a naturally fit individual, Brian, but I would imagine that you've also got to be careful nowadays in terms of warming up and making sure that you kind of don't go to that mindset like in 2007. It's quite a long time ago.
Well, I mean, for most of my career, when I retired in 2018, you're probably at the peak
Yeah.
of your physical prowess. Luckily, unlike Wade, whose incident was very unfortunate, like I said, I don't think he thought it would happen, and he wasn't even, in contact. It literally just unfortunately happened in the way he stepped. So, luckily, the fact that those of us that will be playing are probably on the spectrum of carrying a little bit more weight than normal or than what you did as a player. Um, that you don't have a professional career that hangs in the balance sh- should you get injured. But I think most importantly, having learned from trying to participate in one or two dads races in the last 10 years, yeah, I'm not going to be pushing the limits to see if I can injure myself in any way or form.
Yeah, lovely. And what is Laureus like? It must be absolutely
Mm,
incredible. I've often thought about the glitz, the glamour of such a prestigious event, and you've been involved in that for quite some time now, haven't you?
mm. I'm fortunate enough to currently be sitting in the chairman role of Laureus Sports for Good South Africa, John. And I think, having become a Laureus ambassador in 2008, getting that initial letter from former chairman, Mr. Mona Duplessis, to then sort of being able to see hands-on what Laureus Sports for Good does globally. And, you talk about the glitz and the glams of the Laureus Sports Award and another one in Madrid this year that was absolutely fantastic with the likes of Lindsey Vaughan, Carlos Alcaraz, you had some Real Madrid players, you had Novak Djokovic, you had Kelly Slater, Simone Biles. It was just a plethora of the best athletes in the world. And what is great about the award that happens on a yearly basis, giving recognition to athletes that are just absolutely mesmerizing people around on the globe for a year-long process. But it really highlights the incredible work that Laureus Sports for Good does. And Glitz and Glam Awards goes down to, in South Africa, we've got 27 programs that impacts in some way or form 44,000 kids on an annual basis. And when Nelson Mandela stepped onto that stage 25 years ago at the inaugural Laureus Academy launch and said that sport has the power to change the world, I think as South Africans, we're extremely fortunate that sport properly changed our world. And being able to be a part of an organization where you, as an athlete or former athlete, get to play your part in giving back, making this world a better place, making that element of hope become a reality for those that are really at the most adverse life stances to be able to make a success of their life is a massive privilege and honor. And being able to now, as chairman in a more executive and leadership role, understand how the organization gets run, understand the decisions that you make that really impacts so much more than just the glitz and the glam of the awards is a massive privilege and honor.
Sure. Getting back to rugby now, when people hear Bryan Habana, they think of speed tries and, of course, World Cup glory, Brian. But when you look in the mirror, what do you see?
Um, so I think I see someone that got blessed with talent from God to go out there and do something that, yes, so many young little boys in South Africa want to do, but got to be involved in an opportunity to not only leave the jersey, no matter which team I was playing for, in a better place than what I received it, but that through the selection of coaches was able to go out there and contribute in, yes, as an individual, getting individual accolades, but more importantly, being a part of teams that really brought about phenomenal success, whether it be at the Bulls, whether it be at the Stormers, at the Springboks, or even up in Toulon. And I think for me, the ability to go out there and showcase the skill set that I've been blessed with and inspire people, very much like I was inspired back in 1995 to pick up a rugby ball for the very first time and have the course of my life changed. Hopefully, in what I was able to do throughout my career, I had one or two people that I inspired, and those have then gone on to achieve success in their own right, whether it be in rugby, in the business world, in life in general. And I think that privilege of, yes, carrying the pressure of being an international rugby player, particularly in a country like South Africa, where rugby has really played such an impactful role in bringing people together and making life phenomenal, was really special.
Yeah, I love your modesty. One or two people, it's it's millions, no doubt, around the world. Was there ever a single moment when you realized that you weren't just playing rugby, you were becoming a Springbok legend?
It's a really difficult question to answer. I think while you're actually doing it, you almost don't want to
Yes.
give yourself the opportunity to stop and think what you're doing. I think the privilege of being a professional athlete, getting paid to do something you love each and every day of your life, traveling the world, making friends, the camaraderie, particularly in the game of rugby. I think the main ideology was to see how I could continually become better. And when Jake White gave me my first Springbok jersey back in 2004 and said that you got to leave this jersey in a better place than what you received it. I think it was sort of that understanding that it was great to get you. It was great to score a try with your first touch of the ball in international rugby. But for me, it really was about seeing how I could use this opportunity to firstly stay in the jersey for as long as possible, but make a contribution in the most positive way in terms of not only my individual opportunities, but those within the team to achieve success.
What an amazing rise as well for you. I mean, I recall, I mean, you became from being a kind of a junior player to a World Cup winner in just a couple of years or so. How did you manage the expectations that came with such a rapid rise, Bryan?
I think when you're so young and wet behind the ears, there's sort of no expectations. You just, go out there and live
Yes.
your dream to the fullest. And I think I was extremely fortunate reflecting back on those early days where the likes of Eugene Eloff, who moved me from scrum half to center, and then the sort of setup at the S under 21s where Peter de Villiers was my coach, where we went to Scotland to support, and then Jake White, who had been extremely successful with that S under 21 group in 2002, and sort of seeing something in me, pulled me into the wider group for the inbound Tri Nations in 2004, and I got to taste a little bit of what it's like to be around your heroes, taste a little bit what it's like, particularly with the Springboks going on to win the Tri Nations in 2004, the Morris Joubert hat trick against New Zealand at Ellis Park. I was sitting in the stand with my Springbok blazer over my arm. And I think for me, being able to be surrounded by absolute legends of the game, walking into that hotel for the first time in Sandton in 2000, seeing the likes of John Smith, Percy Montgomery, Osteran, Brayton Pulser, Victor Matfield, guys who I hadn't even had the opportunity to play against because I didn't play any Super Rugby. And now all of a sudden you're gracing the breakfast table or team room with them was absolutely phenomenal. And I think for me, that initial baptism of fire, allowing me to be surrounded by Springboks that truly understood what it meant to be there, truly understood what it meant to represent the Springboks. Jake White, who'd taken the Springboks and turned them around after a disastrous 2003 Rugby World Cup campaign. And as a young 21-year-old, to be able to experience that firsthand, but then also get to see what it's like to be the most professional Springbok through someone like Percy Montgomery, to act like an incredible steward of the jersey, like John Smith was, the legend that was Osterand, who, when I was
Yes.
11 years old, getting inspired at the Rugby World Cup, was a 22-year-old going and absolutely dominating the world. And I think for me, that initial surrounding of a plethora of phenomenal inspirational players, but the attributes of people who really lived out what it's like to be a Springbok was incredibly important.
Brian, when I hear you talking about Lofi Earlof, you starting just to show how versatile you really are in terms of switching from scrum half to center to wing. Yeah, when you look back to those days, I mean, you obviously were just, you said, that's it. If the coach says that's the way I must go, that's the way I'm going to go. And you adapted accordingly. Did you kind of, when you look back to that, and I mean, we just know what a great winger you are, but I firmly believe in my own heart that you would have been equally adept at scrum half and gone on to achieve just as much as you had, or at centre for that matter. But it's quite interesting how you kind of all those different positions moved from.
Yeah, thanks, John. I mean, I'm not quite sure if I would have played 124 matches at scrum off, particularly with the likes of Farid Dupree, Ricky January, Ruan Pienaar ahead of me. And I mean, when the initial sort of sense of understanding when Lofi said to me, listen, I think you need to be, you need to play for the centers. Like, I thought I was going really well at scrum half. And I think it's impactful moments like that that definitely changed the course of my career. And I mean, I was on the bench to cover for Maurice Joubert and David Barry in my first test match on the 20th of November 2004. And Jean de Villiers and Brayton Paulson got injured at the very same time, which meant that myself and Jacques Fourie had to go on the wing. And Jean de Villiers will probably still to this day claim that he made me a Springbok, given the fact that I replaced him. But I think the versatility was okay. Focusing on the craft as a winger became incredibly important. And I did play one test match at 13 for the Springboks. It didn't go well, unfortunately. We played against Ireland in 2006, and I came up against a guy who inspired me. When I was playing 13, Brian O'Driscoll, and it was not the best of days out at the last game at Lansdowne Road for the Springboks. And I think to be able to witness and experience Trico's game playing ability, how I got caught fully off guard and let the team down. I appreciate the fact that you think there was a bit of versatility, but I think what I decided to do when I became a wing was to really focus on that craft as best possible. And even though there are similarities between center and wing, someone like Jacques Fourie was pretty adept at fullback, wing, center. But I think becoming a specialist in that position became incredibly key throughout the course of my career. And initially, it was really cool because no one knew who you were, and you were able to impact the game in a certain way. But as time started getting on, you needed to start innovating, start adapting, popping up in different areas of the field, which I think became incredibly important. So appreciate the versatility. I had one or two passes from the base of the rucks or the scrum to fly halves, but Mornay Steyn definitely cut me out a few times when the passes went above his head.
I love it. What was your mindset like in high pressure moments, like lining up against the All Blacks or running in that famous, something I could never forget, intercept try?
So I think I really thrived in those moments as someone who wanted to make a difference. And to go back to the likes of a John Smith, Percy Montgomery, that as a youngster made me feel, firstly, very much a part of the system. So I wasn't in any way made to feel excluded, or that I wasn't meant to be there. And I think in that feeling of comfort, knowing that, and John Smith had this great saying for us. He said a number of times in the course of my career, he'd say to us, when you go to bed at night and you look at yourself for the very last time in the mirror, are you proud of the person looking back at you? And has that person looking back at you made a positive contribution to where this team is going? And I think for me, that was a really critically poignant manner of self-reflection, self-appreciation, but also self-dedication to a cause greater than yourselves. And I think coming from a country like South Africa, where we do have such a divided population, where we do have such a diverse manner of doing things, I think it became critically key for me to contribute. And I mean, that intercept try in 2007 when I equaled John Lomu's record in a men's rugby World Cup tournament, I'll never forget sort of John looking to me and said, listen, this game's not won yet. I need you to go out there and make a difference. And it was about that ability to contribute, not for individual accolades, but for the greater success of the team, and being surrounded by such astute, I want to say, students of the game in so many facets, whether it be the coaches, the leaders, the players that I got to play with, the respect that you give the opposition, and in no way wanting to be arrogant, but just make sure that the confidence that you exude plays its part in making sure that you can make the opportune contribution should it come around. And I think for me, I always measured myself on the contribution that I was making. And I think some of the lowest points of my career was when that contribution wasn't good enough, not only in my own eyes, but in the eyes of the team that I was participating in.
Are you South Africa's next sporting superstar? Or a brand looking to shine with South Africa's finest sporting talent? Icon X360 is your game changer. We're the premier commercial talent management agency, turning South Africa's top athletes into global icons. From rugby to cricket, we monetize talent with epic sponsorships, endorsements, and digital campaigns. Join the winning team. Visit iconx360.co.za now and score big.
Was there ever a point where the pressure to perform kind of became more mental than physical? And how did you handle that, Bryan?
Yeah, I think as a professional athlete, the pressure to perform was always top of mind. And a lot of, I mean, I got booed off Bloemfontein Stadium in 2010 by 43,000 South Africans. I was having a rather poor season, couldn't couldn't share with the world what was going on in my personal life, and that sort of mental fortitude was absolutely lacking, and the low self-esteem, the lack of confidence was a reality. And if I look back at the time, I get asked quite a bit, who was the best coach I was coached by, and I tell them, that's always a very subjective determinant, because what do we rate best as? Is it winning a World Cup like Jake White? Is it beating the All Blacks twice in New Zealand like Peter de Villiers did? Beating the British and Irish Lions? Heineke Meyer being the first South African coach to win a Super Rugby competition? Alistair Coetzee, who took Western Province back to winning a Currie Cup after a decade? And I tell them the best coach was the coach that selected me. And the reason I say that, if I reflect on that 2010 year,
Yeah.
if Peter de Villiers hadn't given me the necessary support both on and off the field, I would have never gone on to play 124 test matches. I might have gone on to play 60 or 70 if I was lucky. And I think each and every coach that selected me, I was extremely fortunate that in selecting me, they gave me the responsibility to go out there and showcase my skill set. And fortunately, 9 times out of 10 or 8 times out of 10, I was able to do that. But without their backing, and also without the backing of your fellow teammates, it would have been a very tedious 15 years in international rugby, which I reflect back on now and become even more appreciative of the support, particularly from coaches and teammates that I got.
Yeah. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, what's something about your journey, perhaps, Bryan, that fans don't see? The personal sacrifices, the struggles, or the setbacks?
I mean, they don't see any of that, to be honest.
No.
They only see what happens,
Yeah.
between the four lines. I think our generation, I want to say we're extremely fortunate, because we almost got the last bit of the no social media era, and you sort of then went towards the end of my career, into the social media era. And I think a lot of the times you're able to dispel all the criticism, all the unnecessary noise, purely because it wasn't, fully in your face. And you look at this current generation, through the likes of the plethora of social media platforms, the keyboard warriors of the world, it becomes a lot more apparent, abrupt, and in your face. And for us, was always looking at what you got on, in the newspaper on a Sunday after you played a test match, and you think to yourself, how do you get a one playing as an international rugby player?
Yeah.
It was some of the weirdest things, right? Like to
Yeah.
even be
Right. Yeah.
selected to play in the Springboks, and I think coming out of that era of almost no social media, or a very little influence of social media, I think the criticism was very much an internal reflection, where it wasn't as overtly outward going, in terms of how it is today. And I think we were very fortunate that we were able to put a lot of pressure on ourselves to perform, but also in so doing that we had a lot of people around us to support us in that. And I really do take my hat off this current generation that is faced with so much more than we potentially had to be faced with as as a Springbok rugby team back in that sort of '04 to 2015 era. But you look at what they're able to achieve, and how great that's been. So there's a lot that the public don't see, the sacrifice, the heartache. They potentially have a certain ideology of how you should act. So when you're out there with your family and you're just wanting to enjoy your own private time, that you're a public figure, and a lot of the times the sacrifices that you have to make, people don't understand, and until you put someone in that position, they will never understand. So you're almost in this isolated environment of having to navigate yourself. As a 21-year-old, you come into this realm of earning a lot of money, um, and you've never been taught finances, how to work with finances. You get caught up in living like the Joneses. So yeah, there's a lot that you can now sit back and reflect on that. Would you have done it differently? Personally, I think it was all in the building of the person, the character. There were obviously things I would have loved to change. I think the wisdom that you don't have, that you believe you have blindly most of the time, is something that, reflecting on now, I think, not blindly going into things, not understanding the world, because the world is a very dark place at times. And if you don't make sure you understand things, it becomes really difficult to navigate how that progresses. So yeah, the sacrifices, the heartache, the despair. I mean, when you get booed by 43,000 South Africans, knowing that the only thing you were wanting to do was to go out there and represent your country with pride. The last thing you wanted to do was not just let your country down, but let yourself down. Losing to Japan in 2015, that a heartache, that despair, and I think it's become a lot more apparent about how the keyboard warriors can negatively impact a person's whole ability and attitude. And I think for us, when you are at that highest level, a lot of times they say, the tallest trees get the most wind, but what they forget to tell you is that the dogs still pee at your bark, which is which is pretty true. So reflecting on now, having the necessary support on whichever level you felt necessary, whether it be physical, emotional, mental. We had Dr. Henning Gericke, who was with us in the build up to that '07 Rugby World Cup win. We had Dr. Cheryl Calder, who was, an influential figure who was with the England team in 2003, winning the World Cup, and just continually innovating, expanding that whole Kaizen principle of continuous improvement. So even in the tough times, can you learn more about yourself? Can you equip yourself with certain skill sets that allows you to grow and be better?
Brian, we know that, for example, injury is always is part of a rugby career. How did you
Mm.
cope mentally during times when your body couldn't do what your heart wanted to? And we know you always played with your heart on your chest.
John, I was really fortunate that most of my
Mm.
injuries during the course of my career weren't sort of long-term things. The only real long-term one came, towards the end of my career when I started struggling with my knees, no meniscus, bone-on-bone bruising, which unfortunately there still is no cure for. And I think firstly, understanding that injuries do happen, having the right team around you to make sure that you can get back to full fitness. And science has become so much more advanced. You had someone like Renee
Mm.
Naylor, who was a Springbok physio that won 2 World Cups, and I think what the doctors and the physios had seen, and continually becoming better. So I was touched wood lucky that there wasn't no major injuries throughout the course of my career. I did tear my hammy off the bone in my first season in France, which saw me only play 10 games for Toulon, which was not
I remember
what
that.
Murad Boudjelal wanted as as his marquee player for the year. But luckily injuries, but again, making sure that the rehabilitation process, the doctors that would either operate on you or give you the necessary advice, that you follow them. And I think that the difficulty of jumping the gun too early is a reality. So it really was about making sure that you got the best amount of information to make the best decision, and then through that decision making have the correct support team to get you back to where you needed to be, whether that be physically, mentally, or emotionally. And reflecting on my career, I was very fortunate that most times I was able to package things well enough to make sure that my return was as good, if not better, than where I was before an injury.
Wow. Brian, you've spoken about transformation in South African rugby. What challenges did you face off the field, for example? I mean, and how did you grow through them?
um that's a difficult one to answer. I mean, I didn't really have many challenges. I got afforded the opportunity through my parents to go to the best schools, receive the best education, get the best opportunities. If I didn't make a success of my life, whether that be through sports or business or education, I probably have nothing to blame but myself. And I think therefore I'm extremely grateful to the upbringing and the foundation that we got given as kids. My dad and my mom had to go through a lot during the apartheid era, but they gave us, coming towards the end of the apartheid era in the end of the '80s and early '90s, we got given great opportunities to go to some of the best schools. And I think for me, I mean, as much as you see color, I think as a youngster, I saw myself as a South African, and I think that played a really influential role in my ability. Even where there could potentially be racist remarks or whatever, I would look across the field or across, the scrum or the ruck and look at this person and think, okay, well, given my circumstances, I'm in a much better off place than where you are. So even if you are calling names or being racist in any way, I didn't let it affect me because I knew firstly where I came from, secondly what I wanted to achieve, but also what I'd been given to be able to springboard my life. And
Mm.
unlike someone like Sia Khaleesi, who when we were winning the World Cup in '07 was watching a Shabin, watching the game, the final in a Shabin, because his father was an alcoholic, his mother had died, and his grandmother who he was living with didn't have DSTV or Supersport in her homestead in Sweden. Now, I was fortunate enough to go to the 1995 Rugby World Cup final and be at Ellis Park on the 24th of June. um,
Wow. How old were you
Makazole
then?
Mapim, I was 11 or just turned 12. Just
Oh,
no, 11. So 2000, yeah, 95, just turned 12.
oh,
Yeah.
oh, lovely.
So, I look at
Same
that,
way you say.
someone like, yeah, like Makazole Mapimpi, who had to walk, 10 kilometers to school every morning and 10 kilometers back home every day. I was worrying about, what type of boots my dad should be buying me in this upcoming rugby season. So I think the struggles that many players of color had in South Africa, I was fortunate enough not to have. But therein came with a lot of responsibility, and even when you run out onto Loftus and in those early days in 2005, 6, 7, when you became someone that was actually contributing, it became more apparent that I wasn't a player of color. I was just a player, and it was almost to dispel, I think, all the narratives around players of color playing in certain positions or player of colors just being there because of the color of the skin. And again, for me, having the right coaches, the right teammates, but also having that upbringing of understanding that you're not a person of color, you're a South African first and foremost. And I hopefully carry that thread through most of my career. And yes, there were maybe some setbacks, and you didn't always have everything, but I'm extremely grateful for the privileged upbringing in comparison to other players of color that I did get to have.
Yeah, I always loved your dad, Bernie, because I often used to phone him because I remember if I wanted to speak to you, and then he would facilitate the interview. And you spoke about the great
Mm,
support that you had from your family when you were at KIS as
mm.
well. What made the 2007 World Cup team so special from a culture and connection point of view, would you say, Brian?
So how long do we have left, John? I
Yes.
think as I think
Yeah.
as a group, yeah, as a
Yes.
group, we were extremely fortunate that we had a phenomenal amount of leaders. So if you look, uh, John Smith, Victor Matfield, Oosterand, Fourie du Preez, Skalkberger, Jean de Villiers,
Mm.
Percy Montgomery, you had a number of people that could have easily been captain of that group that won the World Cup. At least I think 7 or 8 had played 50 caps or more for the Springboks. So therein came a wealth of experience as well. And I think the balance, like in any successful environment, the balance between youth, experience, the camaraderie, Jake White, visionary mindset of bringing in someone like Bob Skinstad into that 2007 World Cup squad ahead of the tournament. Bob had been overseas. He came back and played a bit for the Sharks. Bob
Mm.
knew he had a specific role at that Rugby World Cup in '07. He wasn't going to play every game, but his leadership capabilities, his charisma, his aura was going to be incredibly important in how those that weren't playing were able to then be energized, rejuvenated, kept on their toes. And I think in any successful leadership organization, particularly in high performing areas, you've got your leaders laying the groundwork. Then you have your worker bees, making sure that they aptly contribute. And if I look back at that team, whether it was the starting 15, whether it was the likes of a Wayne Julies, a Ricky January, a Ashton Willemse, Gertrude Steenkamp, Bob Skinstad, Albert van der Berg. players who only played 1 or 2 games in that World Cup period was players that were willing to sacrifice much more than just the ability to play, but sacrifice themselves, holding bags, being positive, being energetic, being much more than just a part of a team. And I think for us that was really brilliant. And reflecting on that 2004 to 2007 time period, going through the highs, going through the lows, learning a lot about ourselves. 2006, losing 49-0 to Australia a year out from the tournament, and the ability in which we were able to garner self-belief because everyone was slating us. They were saying Jake White, is not good enough to be the coach anymore. John Smith's no longer good enough to be captain. Bryan Habana was just a 1 or 2 year show pony. Victor Matfield, is non-existent. And I think our ability to internalize what we wanted to achieve, shut off the noise, and make sure that the contribution in each and every individual, no matter whether you were starting, no matter whether you were on the bench, no matter whether in the non-playing squad or in the management team, everybody was putting their focus and energy into making sure that we were wanting to become successful.
Basically, what, Brian, is your favorite TV series, your book or band, that sort of thing?
Oh, TV series. John, there's quite a so myself and my wife had to rewatch the Friends 10 seasons quite regularly. House is also a pretty decent one. While I was playing, the likes of a One Tree Hill was pretty decent as
Yeah.
well. Yeah, I'd have to say Friends. I think the ability to just
Yeah.
relax, enjoy a bit of comedy. You almost grew up with that era, and you felt very much a part. Yeah, you felt very much a part of a living environment. So I think, given the fact that it was sort of towards my later teens, Friends was definitely something that was very high on the series watching list, and it did span for 10 years, which I think was pretty cool.
Just finally, you've successfully transitioned into business commentary and leadership roles. How did you prepare for life after rugby while still playing?
So I
And what
didn't.
message would you give out to the youngsters?
So I didn't, and I think as a professional athlete, there's for me 5 things that stand out in terms of if you want to be successful in life, no matter what form that is, whether it be sports, whether it be business, arts, culture, academics. I think the first one and the main one is discipline. If you don't have that attribute or skill set, things become really difficult. The second one is you're going to have to sacrifice as an individual, part of a team. If you're not willing to sacrifice, if you're not willing to, put yourself out there, go through the highs and the low, life becomes really difficult. Perseverance is a key one because life is tough. Life is not easy. You almost need to navigate and sort of find your way through things. And with that comes a element of resilience, because your own internal resilience and how you build things up becomes critically important. And the last one is, and it sort of links to discipline and sacrifice, but it's hard work. I think if you're not willing to work hard and continually innovate, adapt, and become better, you're going to struggle. I think the transition from being a professional athlete to the business world, it's taking those 5 skill sets and applying them appropriately within a business context. I mean, if you can't do a PowerPoint presentation, read an Excel spreadsheet or pivot table, or read a budget or forecast, in any line of work, if you go into business, you're going to struggle. So as a professional athlete, you know that you have those skill sets, particularly if you've made it to the highest level, but it's then applying that skill set or those skill sets appropriately, in whichever realm that you're participating in. And I think for me, I have understood that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And I'm extremely grateful that throughout the course of my life, whether as a rugby player or now in business, that I've had people or teams around me that together with them, I've been able to achieve success. The success I achieved as an individual on the rugby field was definitely not down to my own doing. I think it was, like I mentioned earlier, coaches, the teammates, the physios, the doctors, the managers. And in business now, it's exactly the same. The fellow directors that pay me now, but also the staff, the people working, the worker bees, and you playing your part in that. So for me, it is about taking that skill set and applying it appropriately in life, because I do believe if you do that to the best of your ability, success can be achieved. I think it's also, you need to understand what success in your mind looks like, because unfortunately, success is very different for everyone. And if you're measuring yourself up against other people, I do think in that, potentially you're going to find yourself wanting.
Wow, Bryan, it's been an absolute pleasure to listen to you. Truly inspirational. Viewers, our listeners, no doubt incredibly inspired by you. Your positivity, I can almost say, is absolutely unsurpassed. And I want to thank you for this wonderful moment hearing from you. Thank you for going beyond the glory with us. And if you enjoyed this episode with Bryan, don't forget to follow and share and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and leave a review to help us keep telling the stories that matter. So until next time, keep chasing greatness and never stop going beyond the glory, and follow Beyond the Glory on your favorite podcast platform. And more importantly, share the episode with someone who lives and breathes sport like you do. Rate and review to help us grow, because greatness, as you know, deserves to be heard. And this is more than a podcast. It's where legends live on. This is Beyond the Glory. Bryan, I want to thank you so much for your time. It's just been an absolute pleasure chatting to you and Janine and your beautiful family. May you continue to go from strength to strength. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks, John. To you too.
Thank you for tuning in to Beyond the Glory. We appreciate every listen, like, and share. It means the world. Be sure to follow us on social media and keep the conversation going. And if you haven't already, check out our band link at https://band.link/Beyond Glory, full stop. And that's where you'll find all our latest episodes, platforms, and more. Stay locked in. More inspiring stories and powerful moments are coming your way. Until next time, keep pushing beyond the glory.